The
Please
moment my
stop. You're
husband kicked
hurting
my
the
hospital
baby.
bed, I thought that was the worst thing that could happen to a pregnant woman.
It has
I
to
was
be
wrong,
done, Emma.
because when his mistress pinned me to the cold floor, when the fetal monitor started screaming, when I realized the man I married had been planning my destruction for 3 years,
Here it is.
that was only the
The
beginning.
marriage certificate.
What he did not know,
Jason and I
my
are
father was
officially
already
husband and
driving
wife.
through the night, and the secret he carried would change everything. This is not just a story about betrayal. This is about a wife who discovered her marriage was never legal, a best friend who sold her out for money, a revenge plot 15 years in the making, and a father who would burn the world down to save his daughter.
You, Jason Reed,
Stay with me until the
life
end, because the
imprisonment
final
without the
twist,
possibility
you
of
will
parole.
never see it coming.
So ordered.
The moment my husband's foot connected with my hospital bed, I realized everything I believed about my marriage was a lie. But the real nightmare was not the kick. It was discovering who was holding me down and why she wanted my baby dead. My name is Emma Carter, or at least that is what I thought my name was. For 2 years, I believed I was Emma Reed, wife of Jason Reed, soon to be mother of his child. I believed in Sunday morning pancakes and whispered promises in the dark. I believed that love could be real, even when it felt heavy. I was wrong about everything. Let me take you back to where it started. Not the hospital room where my world shattered into pieces too small to count. Further back, to the life I thought I was living. Our brownstone in Boston's Back Bay cost $3.2 million. Jason told me not to worry about the price. He said money was never something I would need to think about again. I should have heard the warning in those words. Instead, I heard safety. I heard forever. At 7 months pregnant, I had already decorated the nursery 3 times. Soft yellow walls because we wanted to be surprised by the gender. A white crib that cost more than my first car. Stuffed animals lined up on shelves like soldiers waiting for their commander to arrive. I remember standing in that nursery 2 days before everything changed. My hands rested on my stomach, feeling the flutter of movement that had become my favorite sensation in the world. The afternoon light came through the window and painted gold stripes across the floor. That was the last moment I felt truly happy. The cracks in my marriage had been forming for months, but I refused to see them. Jason came home late most nights, his excuses growing thinner each time. Client dinners, market emergencies, deals that could not wait until morning. I told myself that successful men worked long hours. I told myself that his distance was stress, not disinterest. I told myself that once the baby arrived, everything would change. Looking back, I should have trusted my gut. When someone's story does not add up, when the late nights multiply and the explanations grow vague, when the phone is always face down and passwords suddenly change, those are not coincidences. They are clues. I just did not want to see them. The morning my world began to crumble started like any other. I woke up alone in our king-sized bed. Jason had left before dawn, his pillow cold when I reached for him. A note on the kitchen counter said he would be home late. Again. I made myself breakfast. Scrambled eggs and toast that I could barely keep down. The baby had strong opinions about food lately, rejecting almost everything I tried to eat. My doctor said this was normal. My mother, God rest her soul, would have said the baby knew something I did not. Around 2 in the afternoon, the first pain hit. It started low in my abdomen, a cramping sensation that stole my breath. I sat down on the couch and waited for it to pass. When it did not, when it grew sharper and more insistent, fear replaced confusion. I called Jason. No answer. I called again. Voicemail. On the 3rd attempt, I left a message that probably sounded calmer than I felt. Something is wrong. I am going to the hospital. Please come. I drove myself because waiting felt impossible. Every red light stretched into eternity. Every bump in the road sent new waves of pain through my body. By the time I reached the emergency room, I could barely walk. Nurses appeared from everywhere. They guided me into a wheelchair, asked questions I struggled to answer, and rushed me into an examination room. The sterile smell of the hospital filled my nose. The bright lights above me felt like interrogation lamps. Dr. Oliver Lane arrived within minutes. He was tall and calm, with gray at his temples and steady hands that seemed incapable of panic. He examined me carefully while speaking in measured tones. The diagnosis was placental stress. Not an emergency yet, but close enough to require constant monitoring. My body was under pressure, and any additional shock could push it over the edge. Mrs. Reed, I need you to understand something, Dr. Lane said. His eyes were serious above his surgical mask. Your baby is stable right now, but any physical trauma, any sudden emotional distress could change that in seconds. Absolute bed rest is not a suggestion. It is mandatory. I nodded because speaking felt too difficult. Tears slipped down my cheeks as I processed his words. My baby was okay, for now. That was all that mattered, and they moved me to a private room. The walls were pale blue, probably meant to be soothing. The fetal monitor beeped steadily beside my bed, each sound a small reassurance that my child was still fighting. I tried Jason again. This time he answered. His voice was distant and distracted. I could hear noise in the background, laughter that sounded feminine. I am in the middle of something important, he said. Can this wait? I am in the hospital, I told him. The baby might be in danger. Silence stretched between us, then he sighed, the sound of a man inconvenienced rather than concerned. Fine, I will be there when I can. The line went dead. I stared at the phone in my hand and tried to make excuses for him. He was stressed about work. He did not handle medical situations well. He would be different when he arrived and saw me lying here, vulnerable and afraid. These were the lies I told myself to survive. These were the stories I constructed to protect a marriage that was already dead. 2 hours passed. The fetal monitor kept beeping. Nurses checked on me regularly, their kindness making me feel less alone. One of them, a woman named Sophia Mitchell with warm brown eyes and an understanding smile, seemed to sense my fear. Your husband is coming? She asked while adjusting my IV line. I nodded, though doubt had started creeping in. She squeezed my hand gently. Try to rest. Whatever happens, you are not alone here. I did not understand what she meant. Not then. When the door finally opened, I expected relief. I expected Jason to rush to my side, to take my hand, to tell me everything would be okay. Instead, he walked in slowly. His expression showed irritation rather than concern. His suit was immaculate, his hair perfectly styled. He looked like a man arriving at an inconvenient business meeting. But that was not the worst part. The worst part was the woman who walked in behind him. She was beautiful in the way that dangerous things often are. Dark hair cascading over shoulders. A red dress that seemed wildly inappropriate for a hospital visit. Confidence radiating from every pore. I knew her face. I had seen her at company events, always hovering near Jason. His executive assistant, he called her. Mila Torres. My blood turned to ice. Jason, I whispered. What is she doing here? He did not answer. He did not even look at the monitors tracking our baby's heartbeat. His eyes stayed fixed on me, cold and calculating. We need to talk about the house, he said. And just like that, the last illusion of my perfect life crumbled to dust. The house. Those were the first words my husband spoke to me as I lay in a hospital bed with our unborn child's heartbeat echoing through the room. Not, how are you? Not, is the baby okay? Not, I am sorry I am late. The house. I tried to sit up, wincing as pain shot through my abdomen. What are you talking about? Jason, I am in the hospital. He waved his hand dismissively. I know where you are. That does not change anything. The lawyers need your signature on the property transfer documents by tomorrow. My mind raced to catch up with his words. Property transfer? What lawyers? We never discussed selling the house. That was when Mila stepped forward. She moved with the confidence of someone who had already won a game I did not know we were playing. Her heels clicked against the linoleum floor, each step deliberate and measured. He is talking about our future, sweetheart, she said. Her voice dripped with false sweetness. Yours just got canceled. I stared at her, then at Jason, then back at her. The room felt like it was tilting, sliding me toward an edge I could not see. Our future, I repeated. What does that mean? Mila smiled. It was the smile of a predator watching prey stumble into a trap. She reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a folded document. The paper looked official, covered in legal stamps and signatures. She held it up for me to see. Marriage certificate, she announced. Jason Michael Reed and Mila Torres, Las Vegas, Nevada, dated 3 years ago. 3 years. My marriage to Jason was only 2 years old. The words on the paper blurred as tears filled my eyes. This could not be real. This had to be some kind of sick joke or horrible nightmare that I would wake up from any moment now. That is not possible, I said. My voice sounded small and far away. Jason, tell me this is not real. He did not deny it. He did not even flinch. You were never legally my wife, he said. The words landed like punches. Our marriage was void from the start. Technically, you have no claim to anything, not the house, not the accounts, nothing. But the baby, I whispered. Our baby. Mila laughed. The sound cut through me like broken glass. Your baby, she corrected. Not his, not legally. The courts will sort that out soon enough. I felt sick. The room spun around me. Everything I believed about my life was unraveling faster than I could process. Why? The question tore itself from my throat. Why would you do this? Jason's expression shifted. For a brief moment, I saw something dark and satisfied behind his eyes. Something that had been hiding there all along, waiting for this moment. Because Carter women always think they are smarter than everyone else, he said. Your mother thought she could escape consequences too. My mother died in a car accident 15 years ago. What could she possibly have to do with any of this? But before I could ask, Jason's patience expired. Just sign the papers, he snapped. Do this quietly and I will make sure you are taken care of. Fight me and I will destroy what little you have left. My hands trembled as I reached for the nurse call button. Whatever was happening here, I needed help. I needed someone on my side. Jason moved faster. His foot connected with the side of the hospital bed. The impact was violent and sudden, sending a shockwave through the metal frame. The force knocked me off balance. My grip slipped on the side rail. I fell. The floor was cold and hard beneath me. Pain exploded through my body as I landed on my side, instinctively curling to protect my stomach. A scream tore from my throat, raw and desperate. Before I could move or recover, Mila was there. She dropped to her knees beside me, but not to help. Her hands gripped my shoulders and pressed me down against the floor. Her weight pinned me in place. Shh, she whispered. Her face was inches from mine. Struggling makes it worse. Trust me, I know. The fetal monitor began screaming. The steady rhythm that had been my only comfort shattered into a piercing alarm. The sound filled the room with urgency and terror. Please, I sobbed. The baby, please. But they did not move. They stood there watching me writhe on the floor, two monsters in human skin waiting for me to break. In that moment, I understood what true helplessness felt like. It was not the inability to fight. It was the knowledge that fighting would cost me everything. If I struggled against Mila, if I kicked and screamed and clawed my way free, the stress could kill my baby. The doctor had been clear about that. Any physical shock could push my body over the edge. So I went limp. I stopped fighting. I stopped struggling. I focused every ounce of my being on the life growing inside me, praying that my stillness would be enough to protect what I could not defend. Strange thoughts surfaced in moments of trauma. My mind went somewhere far away while my body endured. I remember thinking about the linoleum beneath me, how cold it was, how someone in a hospital administration office had probably spent months choosing this flooring. Had there been a committee meeting? Had anyone considered how it would feel pressed against a pregnant woman's cheek? These absurd thoughts kept me sane while my world burned. Then the door burst open. Nurse Sophia Mitchell stood in the doorway, her eyes taking in the scene with horrified clarity. She had heard the crash from down the hall. She had come running without knowing what she would find. Get away from her. Her voice was steel. Now. Something in her tone cut through Mila's confidence. The grip on my shoulders loosened. Mila backed away, her face shifting from predatory satisfaction to calculated innocence. Sophia rushed to my side. Her hands were gentle but firm as she helped me sit up, checking for injuries while speaking in calm, reassuring tones. I have got you, she said. You are going to be okay. The baby is going to be okay. Jason stepped back toward the wall. He smoothed his suit jacket and arranged his features into an expression of concern. The transformation was chilling to watch. She fell, he said. His voice was smooth and practiced. She tried to get out of bed and lost her balance. We were just trying to help her. Sophia did not respond to his explanation. But I saw her eyes narrow. I saw her take in the positions, the expressions, the fear still written across my face. She was a woman who recognized abuse when she saw it. Help me get her back on the bed, Sophia called out to someone in the hallway. More medical staff appeared. Within moments, I was lifted carefully onto the mattress. Someone adjusted the fetal monitor. Someone else checked my blood pressure. The baby's heartbeat steadied. The alarm stopped screaming. I heard Sophia pick up the phone on the wall. She dialed quickly, her voice low but urgent. I need security to room 312 immediately, she said. And page Dr. Lane. Tell him it is an emergency. Jason's mask slipped for just a moment. Something like worry flickered across his face. But he recovered quickly, turning to whisper something to Mila. They thought they had won. They thought money and power would smooth over whatever had just happened. They did not know that Sophia had already memorized every detail of what she witnessed. They did not know that cameras in the hallway had captured Jason entering with Mila. They did not know that my father, Robert Carter, was about to receive a phone call that would change everything. As security arrived and began asking questions, as Jason's lawyer suddenly appeared to demand rights and access, as the chaos of consequences began to swirl, I closed my eyes and made a silent promise to the life inside me. We will survive this, I told my baby. Whatever it takes, whoever I have to become, we will survive. I did not know yet how hard that promise would be to keep. The next few hours blurred together like watercolors in the rain. Security escorted Jason and Mila from my room. Dr. Lane returned and conducted a thorough examination, his frown deepening with each discovery. Nurses moved around me in careful choreography, their voices low and soothing. I learned that the baby was still stable. Stressed, but stable. The fall had not caused immediate damage, though the danger was far from over. The bruises on my arms were already darkening. Evidence that could not be explained away by a simple loss of balance. Sophia stayed with me longer than her shift required. She sat in the chair beside my bed and held my hand without speaking. Sometimes silence is the greatest kindness. When she finally broke that silence, her words carried weight. I called your emergency contact, she said. The one listed in your file. Robert Carter, my father. I had not spoken to him in 3 weeks. He lived in Virginia now, retired from a career I never fully understood. He told me he had worked for the government. Administrative work, he always said. Paper pushing and meetings. I never questioned it. I never pushed for details. Fathers keep secrets from daughters, and daughters learn not to ask. Is he coming? I asked. Sophia nodded. He is already on his way. Something loosened in my chest. My father was coming. Whatever happened next, I would not face it alone. The hospital went into protective protocol. My room was flagged for restricted access. Security stationed someone outside my door. The administration, perhaps sensing liability, became suddenly attentive to my needs. Derlane explained my options carefully. I could press charges for the assault. I could request a restraining order. I could cooperate with whatever investigation might follow. I listened. I nodded. I felt like I was watching myself from somewhere far above, a spectator to my own tragedy. Around midnight, Jason's lawyer arrived. His name was Vincent Caldwell, a man who looked like he charged $500 an hour to make problems disappear. He wore confidence like cologne, thick enough to choke on. My client has rights, he announced to the hospital administrator who had been summoned to handle the situation. As the father of the unborn child, he cannot be barred from medical decisions regarding his offspring. Massachusetts law is clear on this matter. The administrator looked uncomfortable. Legal matters were not her expertise, and Vincent Caldwell made sure she knew it. I watched from my bed as negotiations happened around me rather than with me. I watched as hospital policy bent under the weight of legal threats and implied donations. I watched as the system that was supposed to protect me began to cave. Within the hour, Jason was allowed back into my room. He came alone this time. Mila waited somewhere out of sight, probably rehearsing whatever story they planned to tell next. Jason walked in with his hands raised slightly, palms out, the gesture of a reasonable man being unfairly accused. I just want to talk, he said. That is all, just talk. Security stood by the door, close enough to intervene but far enough to give privacy. The administrator hovered nearby, clearly hoping this would resolve itself quietly. Jason sat in the chair that Sophia had occupied earlier. He leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, his expression arranged into something approximating regret. Things got out of hand earlier, he said. I apologize for that. But you have to understand my position. I am under enormous pressure right now. Business matters, legal complications, everything piling up at once. I just need your cooperation to make this easier for both of us. I stared at him. This man I had loved. This man I had created life with. This man who had kicked my hospital bed while his mistress held me down. Easier for both of us, I repeated. He nodded. Sign the property documents. Agree to a quiet divorce. Walk away with a reasonable settlement. There does not have to be any more drama. And the baby? His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. We can discuss custody arrangements through lawyers, civil, professional, minimal conflict. I thought about the marriage certificate Mila had shown me. 3 years. He had been married to another woman for our entire relationship. Everything between us had been built on lies. You knew, I said quietly. When you met me, when you proposed, when we stood at the altar, you knew the whole time. Jason's mask flickered. Behind it, I caught a glimpse of something cold and calculated. Does it matter, he asked. The result is the same. Our marriage was never legal. You have no claim to anything that belonged to me before we met. Before I could respond, he pulled out a folded document from his jacket pocket. He placed it on the bed beside me. One more thing, he said, his voice dropped lower, more threatening. If you do not cooperate, I will have you evaluated. Psychiatric hold, 72 hours minimum. By the time you get out, the baby will be born in a facility of my choosing with my name on the birth certificate. My blood ran cold. You would not. He smiled. It was the smile I used to love, the smile that had charmed me into believing impossible things. Now it looked like a weapon. Try me, he said. The door opened before I could respond. My father walked in. Robert Carter stood 6'3", with silver hair and the kind of calm that comes from decades of facing monsters. His presence filled the room immediately, shifting the balance of power before he spoke a single word. He did not look at me first. He looked at Jason, and something in that look made Jason freeze. I know about the gambling debts, my father said. His voice was quiet but carried like thunder. I know about the Vegas marriage. I know about the account in the Caymans. You have one chance to walk out of this hospital without handcuffs. Take it. Jason's face went pale. Whatever confidence he had carried into this room evaporated. He stood slowly, his movements uncertain for the first time. How? He started. You thought I spent 30 years pushing papers? My father stepped closer. Did you think I would not investigate the man who married my daughter? I did not understand everything that was happening, but I understood one thing clearly. My father had been watching, waiting, gathering information that Jason never knew existed. This is not over, Jason said, but his voice lacked conviction. Yes, my father replied, it is. Jason left. The administrator left. Security closed the door behind them, and for the first time since the nightmare began, I let myself breathe. Dad, I whispered, how did you know? He crossed the room and took my hand. His grip was strong and warm, the same hands that had taught me to ride a bicycle and wipe my tears after childhood nightmares. I never stopped watching, baby girl. The moment something felt off, I started digging. Tears streamed down my face. Relief and exhaustion and love and fear all tangled together. Is it true? I asked. About Mila? About the marriage being fake? He nodded slowly. It is true, and there is more. Things I should have told you a long time ago. But before he could explain, before the truth could finally surface, there was a knock on the door. Police officers entered. 2 of them, their faces professionally neutral. Emma Carter, one of them said, you are under arrest for assault and making terroristic threats against Jason Reed. My father's expression darkened. The false victory I had been celebrating crumbled to nothing. Jason had filed charges before leaving the hospital. He had taken control of the narrative. And now I was being handcuffed in a hospital bed. Still pregnant, still bleeding, while my father watched helplessly. The system was not designed to protect people like me. It was designed to protect people like Jason. The ones with money, the ones with lawyers, the ones who understood how to weaponize institutions against their victims. As they led me from the room past nurses and doctors who watched with horror, past patients who whispered behind their hands, I understood something important. This was not over. This was just beginning. They put me in the back of a police car with my hands cuffed in front of me, a small concession to my pregnancy. The officers were not unkind. They followed procedure and avoided unnecessary roughness. But procedure did not care about context. Procedure did not care that the man who filed charges had kicked my hospital bed hours earlier. My father followed in his car. I watched his headlights in the rear-view mirror, steady and unwavering. He had not argued with the officers. He had not caused a scene. He had simply said he would handle this, and I believed him. At the police station, I was processed like any other suspect. Fingerprints, photographs, forms filled out in triplicate. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead like angry insects. They put me in an interview room to wait. The chair was hard plastic. The table was bolted to the floor. A camera blinked red in the corner, recording everything. I sat there for what felt like hours but was probably 45 minutes. Long enough for my back to ache and my fear to curdle into something else, something closer to anger. The door opened. A detective entered, followed by my father and a woman I did not recognize. The woman was tall and composed with sharp eyes and a briefcase that probably cost more than my first car. She introduced herself as Monica Fitzgerald, criminal defense attorney. She had been contacted by my father and arrived within the hour. Do not say anything, she told me. Not one word until I tell you otherwise. What followed was a lesson in how the legal system actually works when you have the right people on your side. Monica demanded to see the evidence supporting the charges. There was a statement from Jason claiming I had attacked him during a civil conversation about divorce. There was a corroborating statement from Mila Torres, who witnessed my supposed violent outburst. There was a photograph of a bruise on Jason's arm. That was it. No hospital footage, no medical records. No acknowledgement that I had been admitted for pregnancy complications before the alleged assault occurred. Monica tore the case apart piece by piece. She pointed out inconsistencies in the timeline. She noted that no hospital staff had witnessed any violent behavior from me. She requested the security footage from my floor, which would show Jason entering my room and leaving under escort after an incident required intervention. The detective looked increasingly uncomfortable. Jason Reed had money and influence, but so did my father. And the facts were not cooperating with the narrative Jason had constructed. 3 hours after my arrest, I was released. The charges would remain pending while investigators reviewed the evidence, but no one expected them to survive that review. Monica shook my hand before leaving. Call me if anything else happens, she said. And it will. Men like Jason do not stop after the first attempt. My father drove me away from the station. The sun was rising, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed too beautiful for the ugliness I had just experienced. We drove in silence for several minutes. I watched the city wake up around us, ordinary people starting ordinary days. I envied them. Then my father pulled the car to the side of the road and turned off the engine. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. I need to tell you something, he said, about your mother, my mother, Catherine Carter, the woman who had died when I was 17. Car accident, I had been told. Wrong place at the wrong time. A tragedy that shaped the rest of my life. What about her, I asked. My father's voice was heavy when he spoke again. She did not die in an accident, Emma. She was killed. The world stopped. What? He turned to face me. His eyes were wet with tears I had never seen him shed before. 15 years ago, your mother witnessed something she should not have seen. A financial crime involving a man named Marcus Reed. She agreed to testify against him. But before the trial could happen, she was killed. The official report called it vehicular manslaughter. The man who hit her claimed he lost control of his car. I could not breathe. Marcus Reed. The name echoed in my head. That man was sent to prison, my father continued. He died there 6 years ago. But his son swore revenge against everyone responsible for his conviction. Against the prosecutor, against the judge, against me for gathering the evidence, and against you for being my daughter. His son, I repeated. The words came out numb and hollow. Jason, my father said. Jason Reed is Marcus Reed's son. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. Jason had not found me by accident. Our meeting at that charity event 3 years ago was not fate. The whirlwind romance, the beautiful proposal, the perfect wedding that made my friends jealous. All of it was calculated. All of it was revenge. He married me to destroy me. Yes, he got me pregnant as part of a plan. I believe so. I am carrying the child of the man who killed my mother. My father reached for my hand. I am so sorry, Emma. I should have told you. I should have protected you. I thought keeping you in the dark would keep you safe. I was wrong. I sat in that car as the sun rose higher and the truth settled into my bones. Everything I believed about my life was a lie. The man I loved had murdered my illusions as surely as his father had murdered my mother. But somewhere in the wreckage of that revelation, something else emerged. Something harder. Something that refused to break. I touched my stomach where my baby grew, still fighting despite everything. What do we do now? I asked. My father's expression changed. The grief gave way to something colder, something I had never seen in him before. Now, he said, we stopped playing defense. We spent the next hour in the car while he explained everything he had uncovered during his investigation. Jason's gambling addiction had spiraled out of control in the past 2 years. He owed over $4 million to people who did not accept payment plans. The hedge fund he managed was hemorrhaging clients. His personal accounts were nearly empty. The only asset he had left was the brownstone we lived in together, the one purchased with money from my trust fund, an inheritance from my mother that Jason had convinced me to combine with our joint finances. He forged your signature on withdrawal documents, my father said. He has been draining your accounts for months. That is federal fraud, Emma. It changes everything. For the first time since the nightmare began, I felt something like hope. But hope is a fragile thing in the hands of desperate people. And Jason Reed was very, very desperate. As if to prove that point, my phone buzzed with a text message. I looked at the screen and felt my stomach drop. It was from Karen Sullivan, my best friend of 15 years, the woman I had chosen to be my baby's godmother. The message read, Emma, I am so sorry. I did not know it would go this far. He promised he would just get the house. He said you would be fine. I did not know about Mila. Please forgive me. I stared at the words. Then I read them again. Karen had introduced me to Jason 3 years ago. She had encouraged the relationship at every turn. She had been my maid of honor at the wedding, and all along she had been working with him. The betrayal from Jason was enormous, but somehow comprehensible. He was avenging his father. There was a twisted logic to it, a motive that could be understood even if it could never be forgiven. But Karen had been my friend since college. Karen knew my secrets, my fears, my hopes. Karen had held my hand through every crisis of my adult life. Why would she do this? I did not have an answer. I was not sure I wanted one. My father took my phone gently and read the message. His jaw tightened. One more piece of evidence, he said. One more weapon for our side. He started the car again. We need to get you back to the hospital, he said. You need rest. The baby needs monitoring, and I need to make some calls. As we pulled back onto the road, I realized something had changed inside me. The woman who had left the hospital in handcuffs was not the same woman returning. I was done being afraid. Done being passive. Done waiting for someone else to save me. Whatever happened next, I would face it head on. For my baby. For my mother. For myself. The hospital readmitted me without hesitation. Whatever had happened in those chaotic hours had been documented, flagged, and reviewed by people who understood liability. No one wanted to be responsible for what might happen if I was turned away. Dr. Lane met us at the entrance. His concern was genuine as he guided me back to a room, this time on a different floor with additional security measures in place. Your vitals are concerning, he told me after the examination. The stress on your body has increased significantly. I cannot emphasize enough how important it is for you to stay calm. Stay calm. The man who had married me to destroy me was out there planning his next move. My best friend had betrayed me for reasons I could not comprehend. The legal system had handcuffed me in a hospital bed, and I was supposed to stay calm. I understood what Dr. Lane meant. I understood that my baby's life depended on my body remaining stable. But understanding something and being able to do it are very different things. My father stayed with me through that first day back. He made phone calls in the hallway. his voice low and serious. He coordinated with lawyers and investigators and people whose roles he never fully explained. He was building something. A case, a strategy, a weapon. I trusted him to do what needed to be done. Sophia Mitchell came to check on me during her shift. She had heard what happened at the police station. Word travels fast in hospitals. "I wanted you to know," she said quietly. "I submitted a formal statement about what I witnessed in your room. Everything I saw, everything I heard." I thanked her, but the words felt inadequate. This woman who barely knew me had put herself on the line for a stranger. She had made herself a target because it was the right thing to do. "Why?" I asked her. "Why risk it?" She was quiet for a moment. Then she sat down in the chair beside my bed. "Because 10 years ago, I was you," she said. "Different details, same story. And no one believed me. No one spoke up. I promised myself that if I ever had the chance to be the witness someone needed, I would take it." We sat together in comfortable silence. Two women who understood something about survival that should not need to be learned. The second day was worse. I woke to cramps that felt different from before. Sharper, more insistent. The monitor beside me beeped faster, its rhythm urgent and alarming. Nurses rushed in. Dr. Lane was paged. My father appeared in the doorway, his face ashen. The stress had triggered early labor. At 32 weeks, this was life-threatening for my baby. Every hour she stayed inside me improved her chances, but my body had decided it was done waiting. They gave me medication to slow the contractions. They elevated my legs. They spoke in calm, professional voices about protocols and interventions and survival statistics. I lay there and tried to focus on breathing. In through the nose, out through the mouth. A simple rhythm that became my entire world. Then Jason arrived. He had every legal right to be informed, they told me. As the biological father, he could not be excluded from medical decisions regarding the child. Vincent Caldwell had made sure of that. Jason walked into my room like he owned it, like he had not tried to destroy me, like the police had not arrested me on his false charges, like any of this was normal. "Poetic, is it not?" he said. His voice was soft, meant only for me. "Your mother died because of my father. Now your baby might die because of me, though. The Carters and the Reeds. We were always meant to destroy each other." Security stood in the corner, close enough to prevent violence, but not close enough to hear his words. My father was being held in the hallway, prevented from entering by hospital staff who did not understand what was happening. I looked at Jason, at this monster wearing the face of a man I had once loved. "Get out," I whispered. He smiled. "Make me." The contraction hit like lightning. I gasped and curled forward, my body trying to expel the life inside me before it was ready. The monitor screamed. Jason stepped back as medical staff surged around the bed. They wheeled me to the operating room. I caught glimpses of fluorescent lights passing overhead, of masked faces and gloved hands, of my father fighting against security guards who would not let him follow. Then there was nothing but pain. The birth itself is a blur of sensation and fear. I remember pressure. I remember voices telling me to breathe. I remember a moment of terrible silence followed by a cry so small and fragile it broke my heart. My daughter was alive. They held her up for me to see before rushing her to the neonatal intensive care unit. She was tiny and red and covered in fluids, her eyes squeezed shut against the brightness of a world she had entered too soon. "Lily," I whispered. Her name would be Lily. Then something went wrong inside me. I felt it before the doctors did. A warmth spreading where warmth should not be. A weakness that went deeper than exhaustion. I was hemorrhaging. The last thing I remember before losing consciousness was my father's face appearing above me. He had broken through whatever barriers were holding him back. His hand gripped mine as darkness closed in. "Hold on, baby girl," he said. "You hold on." I tried. I woke up 3 days later. The room was quiet except for the hum of machines. My father sat beside me, his eyes red from lack of sleep. When he saw me stir, relief flooded his features. "Lily," I croaked. "She is stable," he said. "Intensive care, but stable. She is a fighter, Emma." Like her mother, tears slipped down my cheeks. I had survived. My daughter had survived. We had made it through the fire. But survival was only the first step. What happened, I asked. While I was out, what did Jason do? My father's expression hardened. He tried to establish paternity rights while you were unconscious. He wanted to name himself as the primary guardian. He had documents prepared. My blood ran cold. He cannot do that. He tried. But we stopped him. Monica filed an emergency injunction. The bigamy invalidates any legal standing he had as a spouse, and the pending fraud charges complicate his parental claims. For now. For now, my father agreed, but this is not over. Not until he is behind bars. I lay there in that hospital bed and thought about everything I had lost. My marriage, my best friend, my sense of safety in the world. The first months of my pregnancy that should have been filled with joy instead of terror. And I thought about everything I still had. My daughter fighting for life in the NICU. My father, who had never stopped protecting me even when I did not know I needed protection. Sophia Mitchell, who had stood as witness when no one else would. I thought about the woman I had been before Jason, the pediatric nurse who loved her patients, the daughter who made her father proud, the person who believed in goodness and justice and love. That woman was gone. She had burned away in the fire of the past few days. But someone new was emerging from the ashes. Someone harder. Someone who understood that survival required more than hope. I looked at my father. I am done waiting, I said. I am done being the victim. Tell me what we need to do to destroy him. My father smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for exactly those words. Let me make some calls, he said. I spent 2 weeks in the hospital recovering from the hemorrhage. Lily spent 6 weeks in the NICU, growing stronger each day under the watchful eyes of nurses who celebrated every ounce she gained. During that time, everything changed. My father's calls produced results. A forensic accountant named Harold Patterson began unraveling the web of fraud Jason had constructed. A domestic violence attorney named Gloria Blackwood took my case with the ferocity of a woman who had spent 40 years fighting for people like me. A journalist from the Boston Globe started asking questions that made powerful people uncomfortable. I watched it happen from my hospital bed, then from my father's guest room, then from a small apartment he helped me rent in a building with excellent security. I watched as the man who had tried to destroy me began to crumble. Harold Patterson was the first to deliver news. He came to my apartment with a banker's box full of documents. His glasses perched on his nose as he spread papers across my coffee table, each one a piece of the puzzle. Your husband, he began, then corrected himself. The man who claimed to be your husband. He has been systematically draining your accounts for 18 months. The inheritance from your mother, the savings you accumulated during your nursing career, the joint account that was supposed to be for household expenses. He paused to let the numbers sink in. $3.2 million, he said. Gone. Most of it to gambling debts. The rest to maintaining his lifestyle and paying for Mila's apartment. I had known about the fraud. My father had explained the basics. But seeing it laid out in black and white, every transaction documented, every forged signature highlighted, made it real in a way that verbal explanations could not. There is more, Harold continued. The property transfer documents he wanted you to sign were not just about the house. They would have given him access to your mother's estate. There are accounts your father established in your name that Jason has been trying to reach. He has failed so far, but not for lack of trying. How much, I asked. How much was he trying to steal? Harold checked his notes. Including the house, the trust, and the remaining inheritance? Approximately $8 million. My mother had been wealthy, I knew that, but I had never cared much about money. Jason had handled our finances, and I had led him because I trusted him. Never again. Gloria Blackwood came next. She swept into my apartment like a force of nature, all silver hair and sharp suits, in an attitude that suggested she had seen worse than Jason Reed in one. Let me be clear, she said, sitting across from me with a legal pad already covered in notes. This is not going to be a fair fight. Jason has money, or he did before his gambling caught up with him. He has connections. He has a lawyer who knows every trick in the book. She leaned forward, her eyes bright with something that looked like anticipation. But we have something better, she continued. We have the truth, and we have documentation that a jury will find impossible to ignore. She walked me through the strategy. First, the bigamy charge. Nevada had clear laws about marriage fraud, and Jason had violated all of them. His marriage to me was void from the start, which meant his claims to my property were void as well. Second, the federal fraud charges. Forging signatures on financial documents was a serious crime. Harold's evidence would be devastating in court. Third, the assault. Sophia's testimony, combined with the hospital security footage, proved what Jason had done in my room. There was no way to spin it, no story that would make kicking a pregnant woman's bed look like anything other than violence. Finally, there was the conspiracy. Karen Sullivan's text message was an admission of involvement. Mila's role as an accomplice had been documented. Jason had not acted alone, and the people who helped him were beginning to realize that loyalty to him came with consequences. "Here is what I need you to understand," Gloria said. "In cases like this, the person with better documentation wins. Texts, emails, bank statements, witnesses, they are not just evidence. They are weapons. And thanks to your father, we have an arsenal." I nodded slowly. The woman who had trusted too easily, who had believed too deeply, was being replaced by someone who understood that love was not enough. Preparation mattered. Strategy mattered. Having people on your side who knew how to fight mattered. "What about Lily?" I asked. "What about custody?" Gloria's expression softened slightly. "That is trickier. Despite everything, Jason is her biological father. Courts are reluctant to terminate parental rights entirely. But given the circumstances, given the fraud and the assault and the documented conspiracy, I believe we can severely limit his access. Supervised visitation at most. More likely, no contact until she is old enough to decide for herself." I thought about my daughter, still small and fragile, but growing stronger every day. She was innocent in all of this. She had not asked to be born into a family torn apart by revenge and lies. I would protect her, whatever it took, whoever I had to become. Gloria gathered her notes and stood to leave. "One more thing," she said. "Mila Torres has reached out through her lawyer. She wants to make a deal." "A deal?" "Information in exchange for leniency. She says she has recordings, conversations with Jason where he admits the revenge plot, evidence of Karen's involvement, details about what he planned to do with Lily if he got custody." My stomach turned. The thought of bargaining with the woman who had pinned me to a hospital floor made me physically sick. But Gloria was watching me carefully. "I know how you feel," she said, "but sometimes winning means holding your nose and taking help from people who do not deserve forgiveness." I thought about it. I thought about Mila's hands on my shoulders, her whispered taunts in my ear. I thought about how much I wanted her to suffer. Then I thought about Lily, about making sure Jason could never hurt her, about ending this as quickly and completely as possible. "Take the deal," I said. Gloria nodded, unsurprised. "I thought you would say that." After she left, I sat alone in my apartment and watched the sun set over Boston. The city lights began to flicker on, thousands of windows glowing with the lives of people who did not know my story. Somewhere out there, Jason was making his own plans. He did not know yet how badly his situation had deteriorated. He did not know that the allies he counted on were turning against him. He did not know that the walls were closing in, but he would find out soon. And when he did, I intended to be watching. The Boston Globe article dropped on a Tuesday morning. The headline read, "Hedge Fund Golden Boy's Secret Life, Bigamy, Fraud, and Revenge Marriage." Within hours, it was everywhere. Television news picked up the story. Social media exploded with commentary. Jason Reed's carefully constructed public image disintegrated in real time. I watched it happen from my apartment with Lily in my arms. She was finally home from the hospital, small but healthy, her lungs strong enough to cry with impressive volume when she was hungry. My father sat nearby, monitoring his phone as updates rolled in. His expression was grim satisfaction, the look of a man watching justice unfold. "His fund is collapsing," he reported. "Clients are pulling their money faster than his people can process the requests. By the end of the week, he will have nothing left to manage." I felt nothing. I expected satisfaction or vindication, but there was only emptiness. Watching Jason fall did not undo what he had done. It did not give me back the 2 years I had wasted believing his lies. It did not erase the trauma that would follow me for the rest of my life, but it kept Lily safe. That was enough. Mila's recordings were released to prosecutors the same day the article published. Gloria had coordinated the timing intentionally, creating a 1-2 punch that left Jason no room to maneuver. The recordings were devastating. Hours of conversations where Jason detailed his plans with chilling precision, where he laughed about manipulating me into marriage, where he described what he intended to do once he had access to my money and my child. He talked about his father, Marcus Reed, about the hatred he had nurtured for 15 years, about the promise he made at his father's grave to make the Carters pay. He talked about Karen Sullivan, how he had cultivated her friendship with me for years before making his move, how she reported everything I told her, every fear and insecurity that he later used against me. He talked about Mila, how their real marriage had been a business arrangement as much as a romantic one, how she would be rewarded once the plan succeeded. He talked about Lily, about using her as leverage, about the satisfaction he would feel raising the grandchild of the man who destroyed his father. Listening to those recordings was one of the hardest things I have ever done. Hearing his voice so casual and cold, discussing the destruction of my life like it was a business transaction. Hearing him laugh at my naivety. Hearing him describe moments I remembered with love and realizing they were performances. But I made myself listen to every minute. I needed to understand who he really was. I needed to kill whatever part of me still hoped this was all a misunderstanding. Jason was arrested the following week, not at his office or his apartment, but at the airport. He was trying to flee to the Cayman Islands, where he apparently believed his hidden accounts would protect him. Federal agents intercepted him before he could board the plane. The footage of his arrest played on every news channel. Jason Reed in handcuffs, his expensive suit wrinkled, his perfect hair disheveled. The arrogance that had defined him was gone, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. He had believed himself untouchable. He had believed that money and connections would save him no matter what he did. He was wrong. Karen Sullivan was arrested 3 days later. She tried to flee as well, but her exit was even less graceful. Police found her hiding in her sister's basement in Connecticut, surrounded by suitcases she had not finished packing. I did not watch her arrest footage. I could not bear to see the face of the woman who had been my closest friend, the woman who had held my hand at my mother's funeral, the woman who had introduced me to the man who wanted to destroy me. Some betrayals are too personal to witness. The trial took 9 months, 9 months of testimony and evidence and legal maneuvering, 9 months of reliving the worst moments of my life in front of judges and juries and cameras. I testified for 6 hours across 2 days. I described our meeting, our courtship, our wedding. I described the subtle signs I had missed and the obvious ones I had ignored. I described the hospital room, the kick, the floor. Gloria cross-examined Jason with surgical precision. She dismantled every excuse, every deflection, every attempt to paint himself as a victim of circumstances. "You married a woman whose mother your father killed," she said, her voice carrying through the silent courtroom. "You impregnated her. You planned to take her child. And when she was lying on a hospital floor, 7 months pregnant, you kicked her. Is that correct?" Jason's lawyer objected. The judge overruled. "Yes or no, Mr. Reed," Gloria repeated. The courtroom held its breath. "Yes," Jason finally said. His voice was barely audible. That single word sealed his fate. The verdict came on a Thursday afternoon. Guilty on all counts: assault on a pregnant person, bigamy, fraud, conspiracy. The sentence: 15 to 25 years in federal prison. When the judge read the verdict, I did not cry. I did not cheer. I sat in the gallery with my father's hand on my shoulder and felt the weight of the past 2 years finally begin to lift. Justice had been served. Not perfectly, not completely, but enough. Karen received 3 years probation and mandatory community service. Her sentence felt light to me, but Gloria explained that her cooperation had been valuable and her role had been secondary. The courts had decided she was more pathetic than dangerous. Mila received 18 months. Her deal had protected her from worse, though not from consequences entirely. I never saw her again after the trial. I did not want to. After the courtroom emptied, Gloria found me in the hallway. "You did well," she said. "Not everyone could have handled this." I thanked her. The words felt inadequate for everything she had done. What now? She asked. I thought about the question. What did come next? The trial was over. Jason was going to prison. The danger had passed. Now I rebuild, I said. For Lily. For myself, Gloria nodded. That is exactly the right answer. The apartment I rented was small by any standard. 800 square feet, one bedroom that I shared with Lily's crib, a kitchen barely big enough for one person to cook. It was the most beautiful home I had ever lived in. I chose everything myself. The pale blue paint on the walls, the soft rug where Lily would eventually learn to crawl, the curtains that let in the morning sun but kept out prying eyes. No one had selected these things to manipulate me. No one had designed this space as part of a plan. It was mine, entirely mine, and that made it precious. 6 months after the trial ended, I returned to work. The hospital where I had been a pediatric nurse before my marriage was willing to take me back. More than willing, actually. My story had made news, and the hospital's HR department saw an opportunity for positive publicity in welcoming me home. I did not care about their motivations. I cared about having purpose again, about using my skills to help children who were sick and scared and needed someone gentle to guide them through. My first day back was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The rhythms of hospital life came back to me quickly, muscle memory overriding the months of chaos. I started IVs and administered medications and comforted crying toddlers with the same steady hands I had before everything fell apart. During my lunch break, I found a quiet corner and called my father. How does it feel? He asked. Like waking up, I said, like finally being myself again. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said something that made me cry. Your mother would be proud of you, he said. I want you to know that. Whatever she can see, wherever she is, she would be so proud of the woman you have become. I could not respond. The words were too big, too heavy with meaning. I love you, Dad, I finally managed. I love you too, baby girl, always. Sophia Mitchell became one of my closest friends. We had lunch together at least once a week, sharing stories and advice, and the kind of understanding that only comes from surviving similar darkness. She had been right about herself. 10 years ago, she had been me. Different details, same story. Her ex-husband had nearly killed her before she found the strength to leave. The hardest part is not the escape, she told me once. The hardest part is learning to trust yourself again. Learning that your judgment is not broken just because you trusted the wrong person. I thought about that often, about the shame I still carried for not seeing Jason clearly, for believing his lies when the truth was there all along. But shame is a heavy burden, and I was tired of carrying weight that did not belong to me. I started seeing a therapist, a woman named Dr. Margaret Hayes who specialized in trauma recovery. Her office was warm and comfortable, filled with plants and soft lighting that made difficult conversations feel slightly more bearable. She taught me about cycles of abuse, about how intelligent, capable women can be systematically deceived by people who study their targets like predators, study prey. About how my susceptibility to Jason's manipulation said nothing about my worth and everything about his skill. You are not a fool, she said during one session. You are a loving person who was exploited by someone who understood exactly how to exploit love. That is not a character flaw. That is the evidence of a good heart. I wanted to believe her. Some days I did. Lily grew fast in those months. She transformed from the tiny, fragile creature who had entered the world too soon into a plump, babbling bundle of joy who laughed at ceiling fans and was utterly terrified of the vacuum cleaner. I documented everything. Photographs and videos and journals filled with her milestones. Her first smile, her first tooth, the first time she reached for me and said something that might have been mama. These moments were mine. No one could take them from me. No one could twist them into weapons or use them to hurt me. I was building a life. Brick by brick, moment by moment, I was creating something real and good and entirely under my own control. My father visited every Sunday. He would arrive with groceries I did not ask for and leave with Lily's laughter still echoing in his ears. He had retired from whatever work he used to do, though I still suspected that work had been more complicated than he admitted. But I did not push for details. Some secrets were kept to protect the people who loved you. I understood that now. 1 year after the trial, I received a letter from the prison where Jason was serving his sentence. I recognized his handwriting on the envelope. For a long moment, I considered throwing it away unopened. Nothing he could say would change anything. Nothing he could write would undo what he had done. But curiosity won. I opened the letter and read it standing in my kitchen with Lily napping in the next room. It was short, clinical, almost businesslike. He wrote that he did not regret his actions. He wrote that his father deserved to be avenged and that the Carters had earned their suffering. He wrote that prison was temporary, but his hatred was permanent. And then at the end, he wrote something that made my blood run cold. You think you won, but you only won a battle. My father died in prison, and I swore on his grave that the Carters would pay. I am still paying. But I am not the only Reed. You have met my sister. Actually, every Wednesday, at Baby Yoga. Her real name is not Mackenzie. It is Miranda Reed. Say hi to Lily for me. P.S. The custody appeal was filed this morning. I read the letter 3 times. Then I picked up my phone and called Gloria Blackwood. Mackenzie, the friendly blonde woman who attended Baby Yoga every Wednesday, who had introduced herself 3 months ago and quickly become one of the few people outside my family that I allowed near Lily. Miranda Reed, Jason's sister. I had let her hold my daughter. I had shared coffee with her after class. I had told her things about my recovery, my hopes, my fears. And all along she had been watching, reporting, planning. The betrayal felt different from the others. Karen had been my friend for 15 years, but she had revealed herself before she could do lasting damage. Mila had been an enemy from the start, her role clear from the moment she walked into my hospital room. But Miranda had infiltrated my new life, the safe life I was building from scratch. She had found her way past my defenses at a time when I believed the danger had passed. That felt like a violation of something sacred. Gloria mobilized immediately. Within 48 hours, we had confirmation of Miranda's identity and documentation of her connection to Jason. We had evidence that the custody appeal was funded by assets Jason had hidden before his arrest. We had proof that Miranda's appearance in my life was coordinated, not coincidental. She never made it to Baby Yoga again. Police intercepted her at her apartment the following morning. The charges were stalking, fraud, and conspiracy. Not as serious as what Jason faced, but serious enough to end her surveillance operation permanently. The custody appeal was a longer fight. Jason's lawyers argued that he retained parental rights regardless of his crimes. They cited cases where convicted felons had been granted visitation with their children. They painted a picture of a man who made mistakes but still loved his daughter. Gloria destroyed every argument they made. She presented evidence of Jason's stated intentions, drawn from Mila's recordings. She showed the court documentation of his plan to use Lily as a weapon against me. She brought in expert witnesses who testified about the psychological damage that contact with an abusive parent could cause. The hearing lasted 3 days. I testified again, describing the letter Jason had sent, the surveillance he had orchestrated, the ongoing campaign to destabilize my life even from behind bars. At the end of the 3rd day, the judge issued her ruling. Parental rights terminated. Jason Reed would have no legal claim to Lily, no visitation rights, no ability to contact her until she was 18 and could make her own decisions. When I heard those words, I finally cried. Not tears of sadness or fear, but release. 2 years of terror and betrayal and fighting for survival, and it was finally over. My daughter was safe, truly, completely safe. Gloria found me afterward in the hallway outside the courtroom. Her expression was satisfied in a way that suggested this outcome was exactly what she had expected. "You did it," she said. "You won." I shook my head. "We did it. I could not have done this alone." She smiled. "That is true. But you were the one who kept fighting when most people would have given up. Remember that." I would. I intended to remember all of it. The darkness and the light. The betrayals and the loyalties. The woman I had been and the woman I had become. My father was waiting outside the courthouse. He stood beside a car parked illegally at the curb, a traffic officer eyeing him with growing irritation. When he saw me, his face broke into a smile that made him look 10 years younger. "It is over?" he asked. I nodded. "It is over." He pulled me into a hug so tight I could barely breathe. We stood there on the courthouse steps while the traffic officer wrote a ticket neither of us cared about. When he finally let go, his eyes were wet. "Your mother," he started, then had to stop. "Your mother would be so proud." "I know," I said. "I think she has been watching the whole time." Maybe she had been. Maybe she had guided me through the darkness, shown me which hands to trust, given me strength when my own ran out. Or maybe I had found that strength myself, drawing on reserves I did not know I possessed. Either way, I was grateful. 2 years later, Lily turned 3 on a warm September afternoon. We celebrated in the backyard of a house I had bought with money earned through honest work, filled with people who loved her genuinely and completely. My father manned the grill, threatening to burn everything while secretly producing perfectly cooked hot dogs for the children running across the grass. Sophia arrived with her fiancé, a kind man named David, who looked at her like she had hung the moon. Dr. Hayes came, which surprised me. Therapists do not usually attend their patients' family events. But she had become more than a therapist over the years. She had become a friend. Even some of my colleagues from the hospital showed up. Nurses and doctors who had supported me through the hardest chapters of my story. People who had witnessed my pain and celebrated my recovery. Lily ran between groups of adults, her laughter bright and unshadowed. She did not know about Jason or Miranda or any of the darkness that had surrounded her birth. She knew only that she was loved, that she was safe, that the world was a place full of wonder and possibility. I intended to keep it that way for as long as possible. After the party, after the guests left and Lily crashed from sugar overload into deep sleep, I sat on the porch with my father. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. "You know," he said, "I thought about what this day would look like when you were in the hospital. When everything was falling apart. I imagined this exact moment." "What did you imagine?" He smiled. "Exactly this. You, healthy and strong. Lily, happy and thriving. A house full of people who care about you both. Normalcy. Peace." I looked at my daughter through the window. She slept sprawled across her bed, her stuffed elephant clutched in one arm. She was perfect. She was everything. "I used to think peace was something you found," I said, "like a destination you could reach if you just tried hard enough. Now I know it is something you build. Every day. With every choice." My father nodded. "That is wisdom," he said, "hard-earned wisdom." We sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear. Somewhere in a federal prison, Jason Reed was serving year 4 of his sentence. Somewhere else, Miranda was on probation, barred from contacting me or Lily. Somewhere beyond both of them, Karen Sullivan was trying to rebuild a life shattered by choices she could not undo. I did not think about them often. They had consumed enough of my thoughts. They had stolen enough of my time. But occasionally, on quiet evenings like this one, I allowed myself to reflect on what their cruelty had taught me. I learned that trust must be earned, not assumed. That red flags exist for reasons and should never be ignored. That the people who truly love you do not need to prove it through grand gestures, only through consistent, small kindnesses. I learned that documentation matters, that witnesses matter, that building a case for yourself is not paranoid, but practical. I learned that healing takes time and cannot be rushed, that setbacks are not failures, that asking for help is strength, not weakness. Most importantly, I learned that I was capable of more than I have ever imagined, that somewhere inside the naive woman who fell for Jason's lies was a warrior who could fight her way through anything. That warrior had saved my daughter, had saved myself, had built a life worth living from the rubble of one that nearly destroyed me. "Dad," I said, "thank you." He turned to look at me. "For what?" "For believing me, for fighting for me, for never letting me give up." He reached over and took my hand. The same hand that had held mine through childhood nightmares and teenage heartbreaks in hospital rooms and courtrooms. "That is what fathers do," he said. "We protect our children, no matter what, no matter how old they get." I squeezed his hand and looked back at the stars. The story that began in a hospital room with violence and betrayal had ended here on a quiet porch with peace and love. The journey between those 2 points had nearly killed me. But I had survived. I had thrived. I had become someone I could be proud of. And that, I realized, was the greatest revenge of all. Not the prison sentence Jason was serving, not the public humiliation he had endured, not the complete destruction of everything he had built. The greatest revenge was my happiness, the joy I found in my daughter's laughter, the satisfaction of work I loved, the warmth of genuine friendships, the peace that came from finally, truly being free. Jason had wanted to destroy me. Instead, he had forged me into something stronger. I hope that knowledge haunted him. I hoped he lay awake at night knowing that his elaborate plan for revenge had failed completely, that the woman he had tried to crush was now flourishing beyond anything he had achieved. But mostly, I hoped nothing about him at all. He did not deserve space in my thoughts. He did not deserve the power that comes from being remembered. So I let him fade. I let all of them fade. And I focused on what mattered. Lily stirred in her sleep, making the small sounds that meant she was dreaming. I watched her through the window and felt my heart expand with love so intense it was almost painful. Whatever came next, whatever challenges the future held, I would face them. Not because I was fearless, but because I had learned what I was capable of when I had no choice but to fight. My name is Emma Carter. I am a survivor, a mother, a warrior, and this is only the beginning of my story. If this story made your heart race, if you felt Emma's fear and celebrated her victory, then you are exactly the kind of listener we create these stories for. Drop a comment below and tell us your favorite moment. Was it when her father walked in? When the truth finally came out in court? We read every single comment. Hit that subscribe button so you never miss our next story. And share this with someone who needs to hear that survivors can become warriors. See you in the next one.